This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. I'm John Shegerian, and I'm so excited to have with us today Edward Lando. Edward's the co-founder and managing partner of Pareto Holdings, and Edward's coming to us from Miami while I sit in Fresno, California. Welcome, Edward, to the Impact Podcast.
Thank you very much, John.
Listen, I'm so honored to have you on. You are a fascinating human being and so interesting, and we're going to get into that in a little while, but I had the great pleasure of meeting you recently at the Goldman Sachs 3-day event up in Napa Valley, and it was just so inspiring. My wife and I just were so inspired by what you're up to. I just had to have you on the Impact Podcast. And before we get into everything you're doing at Pareto Holdings, for our listeners who want to find you there, they can go to www.pareto20.com. Share a little bit of your fascinating backstory, where you grew up, how you got to Miami, and all the stops you made in between.
Sounds great. And I'm honored. So thank you again for having me. So I grew up, despite my accent, I actually grew up in Paris, France. My mother is French. My father is Canadian from Vancouver, West Coast. I grew up in Paris. I spent my first 18 years there. And I went to college in the US. I went to Wharton undergrad in Philly, taught myself how to code there. I was definitely interested in the classes, but I think I was more immediately pulled to building things on my own with my friends. And so I taught myself how to make websites. I taught myself how to make apps, and I started tinkering on side projects with my friends. I would say that's the most valuable thing I got from college, is those relationships. And I think we went through dozens of projects when we were undergrads. Some of them were really just projects that we launched over a few days, and others became small side businesses. And then, when I was graduating in 2014, I had a couple different companies going on, and one of them went through YC in summer 14, Y Combinator. It's called GovPredict, the company. It's in GovTech, essentially like a Bloomberg for government that I started with a very close friend of mine who teaches statistics at Wharton. It was not my idea. I just really wanted to work with him. He's one of my closest friends and absolutely brilliant. And I taught him how to code. He's very sharp. And so he picked it up very quickly. We built a prototype. We got into YC. And he led that company for several years, and it actually sold about a year ago. It was a great outcome. But so that was the first sort of serious company that I worked on, and then helped do a couple other things after that. Teamed up with another close friend of mine, Abhi Ramesh, who was working in private equity at the time. We started a coding boot camp together to help college kids get the experience that we got learning how to code in college. And we did that for a few years. I started investing at that time. Our boot camp was mostly bootstrap, but started growing nicely. And we also, raised a little fund to do larger investments and larger checks. And then a few years later, I was the first investor in, and I helped them start a company called Misfits Market, which is in the online grocery space. That company has done very well, and he's led it incredibly, and it's now nationwide, and it's raised a couple $100 million. And over the years, I've been essentially lucky to help start a couple other things, and then make a few hundred investments in startups. And these days, I'm in Miami. I'm here doing a lot of work with a business partner of mine, John Oranger, who started Shutterstock. And we're making a lot of investments, almost one a day in startups, and then we're building new companies.
So let's go back. So you both have started. So is Pareto Holdings sort of is it fair to call it an incubator of sorts?
Yeah, people have all sorts of different names for things. They call things incubators, accelerators, studios, all that stuff. My point of view is Pareto Holdings is a company. It's an LLC. And John and I contributed capital to this company. And out of this company, we both invest and we help create new things. And so I don't really have a name for it. It's more of a vehicle through which we do our work together. And we've hired a great team inside of Pareto that works with us. So that's what it is. And there's a funny story as to why it's called Pareto.
Go ahead. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Essentially, so the Pareto principle is essentially often linked to the 80-20 rule, which is an economics concept that explains that 80% of the returns that you will get from something often come from 20% of the work. And so often people talk about power law, but essentially another way to say it is most of the stuff that you do is not that useful, but then a small percentage, 20% of what you do, and actually I would argue it's more like 95.5 of what you do is actually leads to all the outcomes. So, perhaps in dating, right? If you go on 100 different dates, none of them really matter, but then on one of them, you find the person you're going to get married to, that one date was worth all of the effort, right? Or if you make 500 investments and one of them is in the next Google, that Google investment will lead to all of the returns. And so all of the other investments will be negligible in consequence. So we like that concept in terms of thinking of things to build and things to invest in, because power law and extreme power law to some extent dictate a lot of what happens in venture and startup land.
Understood. Does the genius lie within knowing which is the 5% and which is the 95? And do people get lost in the 95 thinking that they're in the 5? And do the people who actually know what they're doing know when they're in the 5?
I love those questions. I mean, I think there's a few answers. One of them, frankly, is my point of view is that a lot of early stage investors think that they are smarter than they are. And a lot of them try to be too smart. So you hear of some saying, I passed on this company because, I couldn't understand why this market opportunity was that compelling or whatever it was. But these people were clearly impressive. It turns out, I think that being very humble with early stage investing and thinking it's messy, these people are smart, they're going to hustle, they're going to sort of find their way, is often a better way to do it, because no matter how smart you are, I don't think it's possible for you to be able to predict every market or everything that's going to happen. I think, however, another part of the genius is in terms of making larger investments or choosing what things to build. Yes, you can be a little bit thoughtful about which markets you pick. So it's a mix. It's a mix of being humble and thinking the next Google can come out of anywhere, any sort of highly motivated team. On the other hand, if we're going to spend a lot of our time building something, there are probably certain markets that will do better than others.
So interesting. Edward, I get to, because of this platform and this show, I get to interview so many interesting people, which helps me stay connected to really what's happening. And one of the real exciting reasons that we had you on is when Tammy and I met you, you were not only both fascinating and interesting, but you talk about misfits. We already use, we already know numerous of the brands that you've created and helped co-found and help scale. And Misfits is just another wonderful example. But when you say you're doing approximately one investment a day, that velocity sounds both overwhelming and just very, very large. How do you manage that kind of both incoming pipeline and decision-making to get to choosing what becomes an outcome of potentially one a day?
Yes, it really ended up happening because of compounding. So I started angel investing, about 7.5 years ago. And I started because I knew smart people around me that I wanted to invest in, that I knew from college or that I'd met on the West Coast in San Francisco at Y Combinator, all these things. And I was just like, you're smart. I don't get to build a company with you every day, but I would love to take part in what you're doing. And then I usually would commit fairly quickly, not ask too many questions, and just believe in the person, try to help them make other intros. And then hopefully if they like working with you, they make more and more introductions. And that's how you build up to faster velocity. I'm now, I think, between myself and Pareto, which is my angel vehicle with John, at around nearly 500 investments. I think the answer as to how to track all these things is by being very good at allocating your time. So if we make smaller investments, which is the average, like sort of like a quote unquote smaller investment, like an angel check, will be helpful. We'll commit very fast within one call. We'll be helpful. We'll make a few intros for you. We'll answer to your email when you ping us. We're not going to build your company with you every day because we don't have the time to do that. If we make a much larger investment, and sometimes we've written 7-figure checks, which is a lot because it's our capital, then we'll spend a lot more time with the company. Or if we're helping build a company, we'll spend a lot more time with the company. So I think it depends. I think 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, this had never happened to me, but I was still living in New York, and I was just doing like 15 meetings a day or something with a lot of these founders and teams, and I love it, but I was starting to not feel great because I felt overstretched. I had meetings every 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Yeah. I was drinking cups of coffee a day, and I had a couple of panic attacks. I had never had those before, but I was sitting in meetings with people and I started freaking out or sensing that not feeling well. Yeah. And I knew that I had to change something about the setup of the way that I and now we operate with our team. And so teamed up with John, we hired a couple of amazing people full-time on our investment team. They help us review things. They've done hundreds of calls with us to sort of see how we look at companies. And we're able to we've created a better system to scale ourselves. And now we also have a talent team. We have a recruiter at Pareto that helps the companies that we work with hire. And we're trying to build out more systems to be helpful while, having the machine not break.
I love it. So I come to Miami once every couple months on business. So the next time I come, I'm going to invite you to dinner. And now I'm going to say, take me to your office one day. And if I go to your office with you, is there a big wall of all your investments and how you're tracking them? And how do you track 500? And how does it look in terms of you and John's universe? And how often do you guys get together?
We see each other several times per week. I would say there's some days, where we're just on the phone, but we're texting, every couple minutes. I think to answer the sort of poster question, we should probably have all the companies up there. Yeah. The one we spend more energy on we've really doubled down on our model, which is to try to be the first high conviction investor that you will have anywhere in the world. So I would say the most exciting part of our investment activity is what we call the Pareto pre-seed program, where we tell companies, hey, you might be very early, you might be alone as a founder, or you might have a small team and you're tinkering on an idea, or you're just getting started. Anywhere in the world, anywhere, it doesn't matter. We've had applicants from all parts of the world apply, fill out this quick form. If we find that what you're doing is interesting or your background is interesting, we will do a 10-minute video call with you. And after 10 minutes, we will decide whether we do your entire pre-seed round or not. And often, we try to, buy about 7 to 10% of the company. But those companies we spend more effort on because we're higher conviction, we're the first investors. And in terms of tracking those, frankly, like we're building systems. We have a couple different CRMs that we use now, but we're really working on sort of creative, more efficient things. I hold a lot of this stuff in my head, which is not that efficient, but we're going to build, I think, a better machine.
And you're 29, which blows me away. And only in the most genuine and affectionate sense, because we know that genius can come at 77 years old. We know that Ray Kroc didn't invent McDonald's till his mid-50s. And we also know Zuck created Facebook when he was 18 or 19 and a pimply-faced kid at Harvard. But what I love about you, and what's so attractive about you, and I'm sure what draws other people to you as well, is your unabashed courage. Where did you get that from? Was mom or dad an entrepreneur, or was grandpa or grandma, or where did you even get the absolute courage to go from Paris to the States, move around the States, from great cities, from Silicon Valley to New York to Pennsylvania, now to Miami? I mean, it's 4 of the greatest regions in the nation, and to partner up with who you've partnered up with and make this kind of velocity of investments at your very tender age. Because when I was 29, it's not like when you're 29. You're 29, you're probably going to live to, if you look at the actuary tables now, 100 or more. When I was 29,
this book.
How Not to Die. I see it right behind you. I've read that book.
This is a topic I'm very interested in. I'm reading a lot in this space right now.
I love that book. I've read that book. I love that book. It's a great book.
This is probably the topic that I'm most interested in. I would love to start a company in longevity, and that's another topic. Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, I think
where does that come from? Give our listeners, because everyone wants to be the next Edward. Everyone wants to be the next Tesla and Musk, or the next Bezos or Gates, or God, or Sarah Blakely. But not everyone had courage is in short supply. Where did you find yours?
You're putting me in great company. Thank you. I think the answer is a couple things. One is, some people, and myself included, are lucky in that we grew up with a safety net. I grew up. My dad is retired, but is a successful journalist. He worked for 30 years with 60 Minutes producing with Mike Wallace, and is a very accomplished journalist, and sort of, I had an example of someone very successful in his field. My mom is retired as well. She had me at 42. She started her own business, did fairly well with it. And I think I grew up knowing that if I failed, I could go back and comfortably live, at my parents' apartment in Paris and not starve. So I think that certainly
nice.
That is a huge advantage. And a lot of people don't have that starting advantage. So I think that's the first thing. It's knowing that you have a safety net. Some people, I think it helps them a lot. Other people, I think if they have too much of a safety net, and if they're too comfortable early on, you see that sort of like spoil them a bit and not give them the drive. So I think I was in the sweet spot where I was comfortable enough. I also went to a high school, very good high school in Paris, where people were either really smart or really rich, or both, or whatever. And I was surrounded with people who were the sons and daughters of very, very wealthy and successful folks. And I think it made me want to go out and achieve a lot. I think the other answers are, there's a little bit of an existential answer. Why not be courageous? I think a lot of people think that their lives are not as risky as they actually are. Like there's no way to live life in a non-risky way, even if you have a stable career. It's dangerous to be a human being, sort of like things can happen to you every day. You can, get hit by a car, you can get sick, touch wood, you don't, you can, all sorts of things can happen to you. And so my point of view is you might as well take the red pill and do something or do something courageous, or try to do something courageous, because, we all know where we're headed anyways. And so why not try to do some insane stuff while we're here? I think that's another answer. And then I think that the main thing that I'm grateful for, that motivates me, that energizes me, is that I get to work with very, very incredible people. That's the best thing I got out of college by far. Is there are a few of the people that I work with over and over who are my closest friends I met there. I get to now do a ton of great work with John and the rest of the Pareto team. And so I think that part of my motivation is, maybe a couple hundred years ago, we would have been knights going on adventures, on our horses or whatnot. And I think today this is the equivalent. You go on adventures with your friends, building companies and seeing what you can do in the world.
I'm going to get back to the topic of longevity in a second. For our listeners who've just joined us, we've got Edward Lando today. Edward is the managing partner and co-founder of Pareto Holdings. You can find Edward and his partner, John, and their colleagues at www.pareto20.com. Edward, when we sat down with you and we're visiting over a little bite to eat in Napa Valley, you made us lean in when you shared with us that you were one of the early people and co-founders of Misfits, which of course we said we love that brand and we use that brand. And but you also shared with us one of your latest ventures called Goody. And can you share with our listeners what you're doing with Goody, how you came to found it, and what your mission is there?
Yes, absolutely. And it's timely because we have our Goody executive offsite happening in my house downstairs right now.
Perfect.
Goody. So I think I told you this. I keep a very long list of ideas. There are many things that I would love to be able to work on in my life. And one of them over the last few years has come up over and over, which is an easy way to send gifts to people that I care about in my life. Like I love sending gifts. I have people that I care about in different countries, all over the US, and in different contexts, professional, personal, all that stuff. And it's always a lot of work to send a gift. I don't have their information. I don't really know what they want. The brands that are available are not that cool, not that interesting. And I always thought this would be like a clever point of entry into building a compelling e-commerce company. And so eventually, about a year and a half ago, I teamed up with a very close friend of mine who's an absolute product genius, Mark. And I'd already worked on some things with Mark. He was wrapping up his work at another company. He was finally on the market, and I was like, oh my God, I need to team up with him. And we built a prototype for Goody, which started off as an app that allows you to send a gift in 10 seconds or less. You open it, you pick one of the products, you tap someone from your contacts, you add a note, it sends it to them. They receive it, they can enter their address and other stuff. They can enter what size shoe they are, what, if they want the chocolate cookies or the vanilla cookies, you don't have to pick that for them. And if they don't want the cookies, they can swap them for something else. So that was the premise. We launched as a purely consumer product. And then we noticed very quickly that companies love using us because every company in the world needs to send gifts to their employees, to people, both, their employees, so both internally and then also their customers, externally, sort of like to help close deals or thank them. And a lot of the solutions that exist out there are pretty clunky, not that good. Their selection is not that good. I'm sure you've received many holiday gifts from, standard companies that you work with, financial providers, accountants that are like coffee beans and like an ugly mug or whatever it is, and you throw it out. Why not send something better? And it's not necessarily that much about the product, although our products are very cool. It is also about the message, right? Of like, we really value you, we're thinking of you in this moment. Or if you're a new employee joining a company or you're celebrating a milestone, it's helping sort of be this happiness and engagement platform for employees. So that's the TLDR. Our business is B2B and consumer, although I think we have more of a focus on B2B now, and we're essentially powering companies to make their employees and customers happy.
And when did you launch and how's it going?
We launched in mid-December of last year. So we launched, 11 months ago.
Wow.
A little bit less than 11 months ago. And it's going very well. We built an amazing team of 32 full-time people, and we're pure software, so that team gives us a lot of leverage, and we can do a lot of damage with this team, and they're really, really good. We've raised 3 rounds of funding so far with Index Ventures, NEA, great angels like David Solomon from Goldman Sachs. We did another round recently with SoftBank. And we're growing, and there are other players in this market who have been around for years. As usual, with a lot of good markets, there's a bunch of players out there. I think we're very unique because we started off as a purely consumer company, and in the same way as when Slack arrived, for messaging for businesses, people were like, "Wow, this is much better than what I'm used to." Or when Figma arrived to help people design things, that was much nicer than the other tools out there. When Notion arrived for note taking, or when whatever, suddenly people at companies realize they're allowed to have standards that are the same as at home. When they go back home and they use regular consumer products, the standards are really high because it's very competitive. Usually they're used to using clunky software at work because that's what it is. So I think we're building a consumer grade, employee happiness platform and gifting platform for B2B that has not existed before.
And for our listeners and viewers who want to find it, they could go to ongoody.com, ongoody.com.
Indeed, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about what interests you. You've got so much you have great history behind you and have created some wonderful businesses already, which again just continues to be informative and as you say, it also creates velocity in terms of your investment theses. But what is interesting you? I saw that book behind you. I was going to ask you anyway. I'm glad you pulled it down because I'm very interested in that space as well, longevity. I've read that book. I think that book is wonderful. What are the 2 or 3 key topics that you and John over the next 24 to 36 months are fascinated by and interested in really doing something that meaningful in that space?
Yeah. Well, I think we have some overlap with John, and then we have some different areas of interest, which is exciting.
Okay.
So, John, for example, is particularly interested in mental health, mental well-being, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so we've been looking at that space, and as far as and trying, we want to start a company in that space. We know that for sure. John also had actually, it sounds funny, but he had a dream about a video game that he wanted to start, and woke up and messaged a couple of Unity developers in the area, and we ended up starting a video game company, which is just pure fun. And why not? It's exciting, and it's just totally different from anything that we'd experienced before. I tend to be attracted to consumer ideas. I really love building things that people around me can use and love. I think it's fun. I think perhaps it comes from, having grown up in France, where a lot of the things that you admire are luxury brands and sort of things that you recognize around you versus, let's say growing up in Palo Alto, where it might be robotics and other things like that. I like consumer ideas. And then I also believe that if you are in the position where you have the comfort of being able to work on whatever you want to work, and you're not required to work on something just, to pay the bills, then why not work on the things that are most important to the human condition? Because why not make the world better? And it sounds like a cheesy thing that a lot of entrepreneurs talk about, but I do think that there's a lot of overlap between things that make the world better and great businesses where you can make a lot of money. And of course, there are examples of businesses that make a lot of money and that are bad for the world, which I would not want to work on. But look, I think that I think that Misfits is a great example of a company that does great good for the world, that prevents food waste, that gets people affordable groceries. I think that Goodies is an example of something, of a product that makes people smile and feel valued. And when you use it in your personal use case, a lot of people report feeling like a warm feeling after sending or receiving a goodie, just feeling good, like they have a connection with a person. Or employees who receive something for their great work, they're told that they're really valued and appreciated. So I think that it's a nice sort of way to make people feel valued and loved. The things that I would like to start, I've always cared a lot about healthcare. It's something that we obviously are all impacted by. And as we get older, we're more likely to get some bad diseases, and eventually one of these problems will kill all of us. And it's a big deal. And I don't know if I want to necessarily make us live forever, but I do think that why not help people live longer, healthier lives? Why not give people the option of getting older in a way where they're still fit and they can still move around and feel good and not feel like they're sort of losing their capacity to do things. So that is a problem to me, where you tell me, all things aside, you have the luxury to work on whatever you want to work on. That sounds fascinating, like help people live longer, healthier lives.
So you want to democratize the blue zones of the world.
It's funny because I'm just finishing that book. It sounds like you've read a lot of I'm just finishing that.
I told you, I'm very interested in this space, and I've been very interested for quite some time and working in and around that space for quite some time. So it's, but is that close to what the...
Yeah, and people should know, by the way, this is absolutely not planned. It's funny that you're mentioning that book. I'm literally finishing it right now. Well, the blue zone thing is fascinating in that, the premise is that there's a couple of areas in the world where people generally, and there's a higher rate of centenarians, people who live a long, healthy life, and healthy centenarians. And what are the common points? And the TLDR is that some of the common points are that they have a sense of purpose in their work, that they have a sense of community, and that these people do not feel isolated from, the world, their friends, their loved ones as they grow older. They're not ostracized. Of course, there's some element of like what they eat, which is better than eating junk food. There's some element of like doing healthy physical exercise. So I think these things are like lifestyle things, which I think should be democratized. I think that people should totally take care of themselves. I'm drinking turmeric tea here because why not? But I think that there's also like hard science stuff that you can do in terms of maybe replacing organs, or in terms of, other sort of drugs that you can actually take that people are arguing, can make you live longer. I would love to, we've already invested with Pareto in several longevity companies, and I would love to start a consumer facing longevity company that just helps people, have better lifestyle and eat better and just overall have a better life.
It's desperately needed. It's desperately needed.
And it's crazy. What I'm curious if you have an opinion on this. I've always asked myself, like, why do more people not work on this? Because there are so many smart people building businesses in the world, and I love a lot of them. But like, for example, like, I don't know, I'm just taking an example. I'm wearing Lululemon pants. Lululemon is an amazing business, but at the end of the day, you're just sort of making athleisure. Athleisure is sort of like you're making clothes, and that's great. But there's a difference between doing that and building a company that helps people live longer lives. Why do you think more people do not, build these types of important businesses?
It's because sometimes I think it's very hard. It's hard, and they see that it's hard, and they go for stuff that's easier. They go for stuff that's that's not going to have that much friction. I don't think it was easy starting. When you read the story and you watch the rise of 23andMe, that was no easy. Even though they had unlimited money, obviously for who they were. But what they're creating is really what is going to become a targeted medicine company, a targeted, with one of the greatest gene pool bases on the planet. So I just think it's tough stuff. And I think also you're fighting the machine of, all the massive advertising that we all grew up with, pushing on us McDonald's and fast food and Oreos and all the wonderful comfort foods that we all grew up with. So you're up against it. But I've been studying this space. I became a vegetarian when I was 17. I'm 59 now, Edward. And started plant-based eating around 12 and a half, 13 years ago. And I know I work with longevity doctors for my own self. I have MDs, and then I have MDs that are holistic longevity doctors. And there's so much runway there. It's literally unlimited opportunities there.
Funny that you talk of healthy eating. We at Pareto, we own the domain name fastfood.com, and we would love to start a healthy food brand around that. We think that would be very fun. But it's interesting. Several of the more successful companies that I've gotten the chance to be a part of, like Misfits, or like another one called Catalina Crunch, which does keto cereal and snacks, are helping people, essentially replace bad habits of eating with good habits, which I think is one of the huge longevity opportunities.
I dare people. I know that brand very well. I love it. I brought it over to my daughter's house so my granddaughter could enjoy it. And my wife doesn't. Nobody in my family knows the difference. That's not a junk food cereal versus a keto-based cereal with very low sugar in it. It's unbelievably tasty.
You want to hear the 30-second story of how that company started?
Absolutely.
My friend Krishna, who went to Wharton a few years before me, was a dual degree student between Wharton and engineering, really smart guy. People who'd gone to school with him said that he was probably the smartest person of their year. He worked at a quant hedge fund, and then he was really suffering for a while trying to start an auto insurance company, and could not get it off the ground. He needed to raise too much money to do it, and wasn't able to get the traction. And then after a while, he got fed up, and he said, you know what? I'm going to solve one of my own power problems. I have diabetes, which he does. And I'm tired of not being able to eat, breakfast or snacks. And so I'm going to build a brand that allows me to do that. And people thought he was crazy. He started baking the cereal in his own kitchen in New York, in his tiny little kitchen. And a lot of the people who had been interested in backing him for the auto insurance idea were not interested in this market, because, who wants to back a cereal company? And, not to pat myself on the shoulder, but I told myself that I still wanted to work with him, and because I believe in him, and I was his first investor, and then helped him raise some more money. And of course, now that brand is nationwide and doing incredibly well, which goes back to the earlier point of when you do early investing, you cannot be, I think, overly analytical. Sometimes you have to be a little loose and say, I just believe in this person.
The theme that I keep hearing from you, though, is that you're somewhat less analytical, and you trust your gut and your knowledge of the people more. And what I love about what your thesis is you bet on people more than just even the subject matter that they're working on.
Yes, it's a little strange. I both loved and regretted doing Wharton as an undergrad, because it's such an analytical place to go when you're 18 and you're doing accounting and sort of intense finance and sort of different models and spreadsheets, while I think it might be more interesting to study physics or creative writing or history or classics at that age. But I mean, the people who come out of there are often just incredibly hardworking and analytical and sharp. I enjoyed those subjects. I enjoyed studying sort of like, finance and looking at public companies. But I've always loved looking at startups in a little bit less of a rationally disciplined way and more in an intuitive way, which is strange. You sort of hear a lot of this term of pattern matching. But in having done, I think 500 investments at this point, I've probably taken over 10,000 meetings, probably more. And for better or for worse, I hop on the phone with someone or I meet with them, and very quickly within a few seconds or a minute, I know whether I'd like to invest in them. And that's not necessarily the same process that you use to figure out what company you want to build. But as far as figuring out whether you want to invest in someone early, I think that is one of the better methods.
That's fascinating. You yourself, since you're so interested in longevity, have you adjusted your lifestyle with all the information you're taking in on blue zones? And obviously, you mentioned I think it's approximately 7 blue zones on the planet right now that they talk about in the book, and the different algorithm that have proven to work for these centenarians, and how not to die. What have you absorbed into your own lifestyle at 29 years old, where pretty much most 29-year-olds you meet still feel indestructible and are carrying on in all sorts of ways that obviously going to catch up to them later on? What have you done to start walking that walk?
Well, first of all, I think that one of the risks that I have, and a lot of people have in the US and when they work in a challenging career, is I have a lot of stress. I'm sure you have a lot of stress as well, a lot of things happening. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to manage. But there's all sorts of ways of doing that. I'm lucky in that I work out every day. Living in Miami has been great for that. I'm going to go play tennis later. I get to play tennis for an hour or two every day.
That's awesome.
I tend to love eating, a healthy Mediterranean diet. I try to order from places. I don't really get the chance to cook much, which is not good, but I tend to order from sort of, places that have healthy Mediterranean food. I'm French, so I enjoy drinking red wine, and I drink it almost daily, which might seem insane, but I actually went to see my doctor a few weeks ago, and I was asking him, different doctors have different opinions, and I'm sure your longevity doctors have their own, but I asked him about drinking. And he said, I don't know if the doctor has ever told you this, there's a J curve for drinking, which essentially it's a chart, which, shows sort of like expected mortality rates and so on with men and women. And you are technically, some studies show you're going to live longer if you have, or there's a correlation between, having a couple of drinks a day and living longer. And for men, I believe it was 2 to 3. For women, it was more closer to 1. But it's actually, this is, there can be a debate around this, but it might be linked in terms of having a couple of drinks a day, just simply helping people relax, loosen stress, and then also certain antioxidants that go with that, and then also alcohol breaking down things and fighting, fighting the diabetes and other problems like that. So I think that's another one. And then I do think maintaining its link to the people that I get to work with or that I'm close to, maintaining very close social relationships is the most important thing. I'm sure when you, like everyone else, when you feel isolated and not close to your loved ones and not loved, you're not going to feel good. When you feel warm and surrounded by people that you love, you feel good. So it's pretty simple. We're kind of like plants. We want good food. We want to, sort of like have sun exposure, all that stuff. These are some simple ingredients, at least for part one. I think there's a lot more that can be done. Yeah.
Right. It's funny you bring up your friend who started the cereal company because he had diabetes. The New York Times just reported a fascinating story that's going to, I believe, be a part of the beginning of game changing in long-term healthcare, the issue of stem cells. And they talked about this weekend, they wrote a huge article on the first stem cell breakthrough when it comes to diabetes, and patient number 1, literally type 1 diabetes fully resolved with the stem cell breakthrough that they've made, which is, let's say, massive. Game changer.
That is incredible. And I wonder what lab or result that this came from. I think I know someone else very interesting in this longevity space who believes that there simply is not enough funding that goes into some of these efforts. Right. And people are not, and to some extent, yes, you need to make these lifestyle changes, but then you also need to back these scientific experiments, and you need to give them more exposure because a lot of these breakthroughs are going to happen in the lab. like fighting diabetes, fighting diseases, again, printing new organs if they fail, whatever it might be. I think you just need to actually get the right ideas and people funded.
I'll send you that article later on today so you have it and you can read it. I think you'll enjoy it and get a lot out of it. And it explains the labs that it came from. For our, we have a lot of listeners and viewers that are going to watch us around the world and say, I want to apply to your, to Edward's company to get funded. Yeah. I want to make sure this is done in an orderly way. Walk them through again what your expectations are and how to even apply on your website to even have their voice heard.
Yeah. So if you want funding for your company, you can go to Pareto20.com, Pareto 20.com. And there's a form for pre-seed funding and you can apply. And then if you want to talk to me about longevity, anything like that, you can either direct message me on Twitter. I'm at Edward Lando, Lando, or you can email edward@pareto20.com. And I want to start, one or several companies in longevity. I want to back a lot of companies in healthcare. That's definitely a space of particular interest. So please reach out. And
for our listeners and viewers who also want to partake in and enjoy your newest brand, Goody, they could go to www.ongoody.com, ONGOODY.com, ongoody.com.
If you're a company, you can go there and you can sign up for a business and start gifting to your employees or to your customers, especially with this holiday season. And if you want to use it in your own personal use case, you can go to the App Store on your phone and just look up Goody, Goody, and we are the gifting app on there.
Edward, when you write the check, and this is something you do a lot, so that's why I'm going to ask you. And the young entrepreneur is, of course, very happy, and it's a big day in his or her life. What's the parting words on that day that you give them once you write that first check? What's the sort of guidance that you give them for what is becoming the beginning of the journey?
Couple answers. I would say one is, you can learn from what other successful pre-seed funds and programs have done. I think Y Combinator does this well, where I believe that the reason that these programs do well is that they simply encourage people to push harder, in their program for a few months. There's all sorts of these accelerators. They just encourage them to work harder. They create a little bit of a sense of competition with their other companies around them. Everyone's reporting on weekly growth metrics, and they feel like they have to push more. So people make a lot of progress when they're put in cohorts and when they are asked to quantify their progress in some way. So I think, encouraging people to quantify things, as hard as that might be early on, and reporting on it, to us, not because we're going to do anything necessarily, but because we'd like to keep them accountable to making some progress is one. I think, people make fun of me. My friends make fun of me for, I use the word aggression a lot, and I love just people who push more, who are more aggressive. I think people should move faster generally than they actually move. Most people do not have enough of a sense of urgency. I may be particularly allergic to that because I grew up in Europe, and I think that Europe is wonderful, but it's a little bit too slow, and I love it when I go back home to France, or when I go to Italy, and you enjoy your meal and it takes forever, and you're asking if you can get the main dish now or whatever. Let's wait until the first course is fully done, and they're taking their time. I think you need to sort of, in startup land, move faster. So that's another thing, another word of encouragement. And generally be a little bit crazier. As you said earlier, people build all sorts of businesses. I think that a lot of people don't allow themselves to sort of be ambitious enough. And I do really believe that, and I guess once we invest, it's too late to have them change often, but, or change what they work on. I think that it's just as hard to build a very ambitious company as it is to build a decently ambitious one, or maybe just a tiny bit harder to build a rocket company. And so I think you might as well do the hard stuff.
I love it. And for that, we're going to leave it, but we're going to have you back, Edward, to share this journey. You've got so much to do in front of you, and you've already done so much in the rearview mirror, but we want to have you back here to continue this discussion. For our listeners and viewers, again, to find Edward, John, and their partners and colleagues, go to www.pareto20.com. To go to find Goody, go to ongoody.com. And And if you really want to see a fun website with a lot of inspiration on it, you can check out Edward's own website at edwardlando, LANDO.com. It's got a lot of inspiration, a lot of what drives him, and a lot of what's informed him in his very young but very successful life. Edward, thanks for making the impact you're making. You are truly an inspiration, and I'm so grateful that you shared some time with us today on the Impact Podcast.
Thank you, John, and let's catch up at some point in 2022 and see what progress we made.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking platform revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With thousands of athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent for speeches, custom experiences, live streams, and much more. For more information on Engage or to book talent today, visit letsengage.com.